Welcome to Late Medieval Changes in Europe. We are most of the way through the postclassical period here, or what we call the medieval period or the Middle Ages, and not the Dark Ages, remember, in Europe. So, here we go. First, here's your journal. Let me just remind you that if I don't leave the image on a slide long enough, you can pause it. In class, I pause so you can write down, but here, it's one of those things that sometimes people forget, and then they ask me the next day, and then they feel awkward because their classmates make fun of them, which isn't nice, but there you go. And then, of course, don't forget to answer yesterday's key question. That's pretty, well, key, huh? All right, here's today's key question. What changes came to England and Germany in the late post-classical era? That's what we're talking about today. All these changes that happened. And the reason they matter is because most of them still affect us today. And, of course, because this is setting the stage for some future events. Now, we'll start with England, which you already figured out because it says England in large friendly letters in the middle of your screen. Now, England was ruled by a guy named Richard the Lionhearted. Richard the First was his, kingly title. And this is his shield, his coat of arms. You can tell that he was pretty impressive. He's called the Lionhearted because he's so brave. Now, most of you are sitting there and thinking, wait a minute, I've already heard of this guy. Yes, we have. When we talked about the Crusades, we talked about Richard the Lionhearted, the guy who went during the Third Crusade. And I told you that he would be important later, and here he is. He's important. So why is he important? Because he's not there. King Richard is gone on a crusade. Now, when he leaves his mother, a lady named Eleanor, that we'll also talk about, and as the regent, and his brother, Prince John, in charge. Now, Prince John was horrible. This is the guy, we are talking Robin Hood level horrible. Robin Hood, I don't know, he might have been a real person. There's some evidence of a person named Robert Hood who was arrested several times. But then there's a time period where whenever they arrest a kind of bandit thief that lives in the forest, they call him Robin Hood or Robert Hood. There's like 200 years and there's 20 or 30 of them. So is he real? Probably. He's probably based on a real person. Does he really have a lot to do with this story? In real life, probably not. But of course, in our stories and in the stories that pop up in the late Middle Ages, he's got everything to do with it. But I just want to remind you, this is the story. So remember John, not John the First, John the Worst. How bad was he? Well, he was bad. He was bad. He was oppressive. His taxes were way too high. He wanted to be in charge. He imprisoned people without trial. He was not a good guy. He is also, by the way, one of my direct line ancestors. I can only hope to one day be half the teacher, half as bad as a teacher as he was as a king. I try every day, but as I practice, I just get better. So that's why I decided to be absent a lot, so I can be as bad as my ancestor. It's a good goal, huh? Yeah. Now, all of this Robin Hood stories end the same way. John is being a jerk, and all of a sudden, here comes King Richard. Richard shows up, and the nobles and the people are saved by the return of Richard, who is brave and just. Personally, I like the Mel Brooks Men in Tights version, where his punishment to Prince John is that all toilets in the kingdom will, from henceforth and forever, be known as John's. That one makes me happy. Of course, in the Disney version, he just breaks some rocks, which is supposed to be really bad. But in real life, Richard does come back, and everything seems lovely, except for this. Yes, that is not his actual body. That's the stone carved that sits on top of his body. His body's under there. But yeah, Richard the First, he dies. And when he dies, that's his wife next to him, by the way. When he dies, who becomes king? He doesn't have a son. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the new king is John. The guy that they were so excited. So, Richard the First comes back, but it doesn't save anyone because Richard dies. There's a couple cool things about this that I'll just point out. One is that you could see what he kind of looked like. That's kind of cool. And two is notice that his name is in French. French was the language of the nobility. Yeah. Okay. And that place is in France. So the new king is John the First, but this time they know Richard's not going to come back and save them. They're going to have to do something themselves to save themselves. So what do the nobles do? Well, they rebel. They rebel. King John doesn't have the legitimacy to be as big a jerk as he's being, and so the nobles have a revolution. As they sit there laying siege to London, John knows that he's going to die. And so he decides he will broker a treaty with them. And that treaty is the reason this whole story matters. The noble solution is a thing called the Magna Carta. That sounds fancy, but it's just Latin for the big charter. Signed in 1215, notice both are underlined. That means both are vocabulary. So Magna Carta, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. 1215 is the date it was signed. It's a hub date. Hey, so here's John signing the thing. Notice the nobles look pretty angry. John himself is not too happy about this turn of events. He's essentially being forced at sword point to sign this document that gives a bunch of rights to the nobles. He's not a fan. But here's why it matters. This document is like one of the first codifications, codify, of a few key elements that we still have in law. The first is called due process. Due process means that you can't take someone's possessions or their job or their land or their titles, in the case of these nobles, without having some sort of thing allowing the person to defend themselves. Due process means that they have a fair shake at this. The king has to justify his decisions. He can't just be like, I don't like you, and I'm going to take your lands away. That's not okay. The second thing that this says that still, we still hold today is the right to a fair trial. You can't imprison someone without a fair trial. And that's a fair trial, like trial by jury, like, not, hey, you have rebelled against me, so I'm just willy-nilly going to decide to throw you in prison. He can't do that. And he can't hold them there too long, and these are the reasons why the Magna Carta matters. There is a depiction of this whole thing at the Supreme Court building. This is how big an impact it has even on our current documents. And that's why this matters. Now, don't write this part down, but unfortunately, it doesn't last long. Within a few months, John appeals to the Pope, and the Pope is mortified by this. If you can overthrow someone else's legitimacy, maybe you could overthrow his, and so he nullifies it. He declares it null, and the fighting resumes, and then John dies the next year of dysentery. So, for these nobles, it doesn't really fix the problem, but it has a huge impact on future documents, and that's why we care. Now, on to Germany. Now, I say Germany, but it's not really Germany yet. It's a whole bunch of different feudal states. A whole bunch of them. Now, one guy starts to conquer a bunch of these, and he decides he wants to rebuild the Roman Empire. See him here depicted in tiles. It's called a mosaic. The way Justinian had been. See, this is him. I'm going to rebuild the Roman Empire. And when you try to rebuild the Roman Empire, and you do it well enough, just like with Charlemagne, the Pope calls you in and declares you the Holy Roman Emperor. And that's what happens with Otto. And so the German states become the Holy Roman Empire. Voltaire once said it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, and that's totally true. It has nothing holy about it. It's not really Roman, and it's definitely not actually an empire. It's this loose confederation of German states. But it's going to be called the Holy Roman Empire from here, which is like, 1,000 years ago, give or take a little bit, and it's 9-something if I remember right, until Germany is formed in the 1870s. So while Charlemagne was the Holy Roman Emperor, and I want you to remember that, really when I say Holy Roman Empire, you think Germany. I say Germany, you think Holy Roman Empire. So just get that set in your head. I say Holy Roman Empire, you think Germany. And this is another thing that's going to be really important later. Sometimes a few people, the College Board, or people who've developed stuff for AP, abbreviate it H.R.E. So if you see that, that's what it means. Now, go back, write the questions to the side, like you're supposed to review. The key elements are, what does the Magna Carta do? Why is the Magna Carta formed? Because it has to do with John's legitimacy. And, of course, how is the new Holy Roman Empire formed?